if available to you, and you haven't done so yet, closing down the eyelids and just letting the eyes rest, or just finding a soft gaze. And then from there, just taking the biggest, deepest breath you've taken all day and let that go. We're going to do that one more time, and I'm just going to remind everybody you're all on mute. So you can really let it go with a sigh as you release the breath. So let's give it everything we've got for this Tuesday, and taking in now the biggest, deepest breath you've taken all day today. Holding it. Sipping in just a little bit more. And then when you can't hold any longer, just let that go on a sigh. And now above your head, with your mind's eye and amazing imagination, you see a globe of beautiful, sparkling white light. And each time that you breathe in, that white light just gets brighter and brighter and brighter and larger. And then as you breathe out, all of that light just rains down over you. So now in your own time, in your own way, and with your own relationship to that light, you're going to take the big, deep breath in and see, feel, and imagine that light just getting bigger and brighter above your head. And then as you let your breath go, all of that amazing, beautiful light just shines and showers down all over you, bringing in a sense of calm, a sense of groundedness, centered, open, willing, and available. And now I'm going to invite you to stay with that sense of centered, willing, open, available, and now open your eyes and just begin to see who is with you in this space, with all of the light that we all share. And from this place, we're going to dive in and learn a little bit more and share just maybe a little bit more light. So welcome everybody to today's Fearless Chat.
Yes, thank you, Deborah Driscoll. We have this little gesture in our community, which we call elevated sparkleation. So we're going to elevate it, sparkleate. Deborah, thank you. And there's also self-elevated sparkleation, which is also very useful and helpful. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eduardo Placer. I am the founder of Fearless Communicators. We're a public speaking coaching company, and we're committed to working with thought leaders on elevating their voices and stories, coming from a place of power, authenticity, and truth. And we found ourselves about 7 weeks ago, like most people, completely stopped, not knowing where to go, where to turn, what to do. I live in New York City. I'm currently exiled from New York. I don't know when I'll be back home. I am currently socially distancing and quarantining in Miami, which is where my parents are from. My parents are also displaced. They're in Boston with my sister. And in that moment, initial stopping, pausing, figuring out where we were, what I knew to do inherently was to turn to the thought leaders in our community who think about the things that I think are top of mind for most of us at this moment. And it's in that space that we started our Fearless Chat series. We've been hosting them now for the past 7 weeks on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we've had everyone from a cybersecurity expert talking about cybersecurity during this time, heart-centered sales, how does one sell in this ecosystem, to conversations around branding, conversations around pivoting. I had the conversation on Thursday last week on storytelling. And I can't tell you how excited I am to have this conversation today with one of my favorite people on the planet, and that's not a hyperbole, and that is Nita Baum. So Nita Baum, I met in New York City in Union Square at a dig-in maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And when we saw each other face to face in that dig-in, we just exhaled. It was one of those inherent moments of just like, and she was an early Fearless Communicators client. She's been a colleague, she's been a collaborator. She was a participant in our Fearless Force program, and she's also an advisory board member for Fearless Communicators. She is brilliant, she is generous, she is kind, and she is a light on this planet. And I'm so happy to be having this conversation today around our nervous system and how we can show up in work and well-being and the journey of that with all the stresses that we're experiencing in this current moment. So with that as a background, Nita Baum, let's begin. Yes.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us. It's amazing to have people from across the globe together in community. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen, and we are going to talk about well-being and work. Okay. So the flow of our conversation will be why we're talking about the nervous system. We're going to talk specifically about Polyvagal Theory, which is a theory about the nervous system that has the latest insights from neuroscience about it. And then we're going to get into some practices and supports that can enable you to make desired shifts and create new patterns that support your well-being.
I want to invite those of you who are watching, we really want this to be an engaged and an active conversation. So if you have a question, please use the chat function. There are over 30 people on the call, so it's hard to have people jutting in verbally in the moment. But if you do have a question, something that piques your interest, something that you want us to delve into more, please post it in the chat and I'll channel that into the conversation. Okay?
Great. Eduardo, do you want to read this quote for us?
Sure. Oh my God. Well, why don't we have somebody else read it?
Or somebody else read it? Yeah.
I'm going to invite Jason Igani to read it.
Our navigation of the world is a mind-body experience. Studying our nervous systems empowers us to understand the story and impacts of the mind-body connection. Nervous systems are not just individual, they are collective. Our nervous systems impact each other.
Thank you, Jason. So part of why I really like the first part of this is we are here with a fearless communicator who focuses on storytelling, and studying our nervous systems is about learning the stories that we tell, the way we make sense of our mind-body experience. And one thing I like to reflect on is the fact that if we're telling one story, we have the capacity to tell many others. Also, learning about your nervous system isn't just about yourself. We all have nervous systems. So learning about your nervous system can make you more sensitive to your own, as well as to that of the people you're in relationship with. Nervous systems are collective. And the other thing to understand about them is they impact each other. So my state impacts yours and vice versa. Little nod to interdependence, which I think many of us are feeling and experiencing in different ways in this moment. So why the purpose of our study today? And I always like to take a learning orientation, an experiential orientation, and experiment and play. So what are we studying and why? Part of why we want to learn about our nervous systems is to grow self-awareness of how we make sense of our experience through our minds and bodies, how we communicate with people we're in relationship with, including ourselves. So I like to think about the relationship between me and myself and closing the understanding or the gap and the space between those two things. And growing self-awareness in support of our well-being and sustainability. So as we'll get into, you'll notice that being able to understand the state you're in can help you decide to stay in it, shift it, and engage well-being practices that support your long-term well-being. We can apply this awareness to understanding the self as well as to interpersonal and we perspectives, right? So you can use this at home and at work with teams that you're on, with teams and communities that you're part of beyond work.
That's amazing. And Scott, I think your dog or cat just like crawled right behind you. That was amazing to kind of, I was like, and the animal wanted to be a part of this conversation too.
Yeah.
Like parasympathetically kind of like a little bit.
Little embodied movement by our animal. So I'll keep this short, but we think of, especially when we're doing this work with teams at work, we think of this as embodied groundwork that prepares us to be more fully embodied, more aware, and more present. And embodiment you could just think of as being more connected to and sensitive to the totality of your body, as opposed to just what we think of as our minds or our brains. In the West especially, we tend to be pretty heady and we have a lot of energy up here. So some of this is about connecting ourselves more wholly. It also helps us take better care of ourselves and each other as we interact, listen to, and communicate with each other. And the state of your nervous system has an impact on every one of those things. And finally, growing our capacity to navigate what I'm describing as our charges. Like, how do we navigate both comfort and discomfort? Or another way to put it is, how do we grow greater comfort with both comfort and discomfort? That's a little meta, but we'll
say that again, Nita?
Yeah.
Deborah, do you mind typing this into the chat? So say that again, Nita.
Yeah. So how do we grow comfort with both feelings of comfort and discomfort? Okay. So an example of that, right, is sometimes something great happens and we experience a little jolt of joy or happiness. And then immediately one of our reactions is something great happened, and that thing that happened, that money I got, or that friend who came to visit me, like there's going to be a loss. I'm going to lose it. It's not going to stay. And we quickly shift from that state, which you could argue is like an abundant state, right, of comfort, to discomfort. Like we're so infrequently, or maybe to put another way, we experience discomfort with comfort as much as we do with discomfort itself.
Love that. That reminds me, I've been thinking about this because I feel like we're in a time where like the balance of the feelings can change so quickly. Like I'm grateful and terrified. Do you know what I mean? I'm hopeful, I'm happy and I'm depressed. I'm anxious and I'm excited. And it reminds me, I have a acute condition called show tunitis, where I burst out into show tunes. And there's a musical theater composer named Stephen Sondheim, and he wrote this musical called Company, and there's a song called Sorry Grateful about marriage. You're always sorry, you're always grateful. And I think it's the ability to be with the two. I think the curiosity that they don't have to be in opposition to each other, but how do we be with both, I think is really interesting.
Yeah. I've experienced a lot of grief in my life. And at some point, my experience with it became about the joy of grieving, just like recognizing that leaning into that experience, there's insight and light that comes on the other side of it. And sometimes when actually in it.
That's beautiful. Brian just wrote, I also know how comfortable we can get with dysfunction and uncomfortable energy as our normal. But when we don't sense it, something seems off. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you for that, Brian.
Yeah. Attuning our ability to sense. Thank you. That's awesome. So I'm going to give you a couple of views on Polyvagal Theory. It's a pretty complex theory, who some wonderful people in the trauma healing world and from other disciplines have done a lot of work to distill. So just here on the left, quickly, here's one view into how we can think about what the theory tells us. So there are 3 primary adaptive responses in Polyvagal theory. Another way to put it is there are 3 vagal pathways. The ventral vagal is when you're at the top of the ladder on this side and you feel connected, relaxed, and well. The sympathetic state is when you feel you're in danger and you need to either fight or flee to respond. And the dorsal vagal is when you feel you can't cope, you're collapsed and shut down. And sometimes that manifests as a feeling of, I can't, you're maxed out. Just a little bit on the sort of history of this. In evolutionary theory, the ventral vagal system developed last. It's the most recent system. And it is, the other name for it is social engagement. So it's really interesting. There are a lot of really deep and interesting implications about its development later in evolutionary theory, but it's a pro-social pathway is one way to think about it. I think one of the other really fascinating concepts, and Stephen Porges, this comes from his body of work. He has many other collaborators, but he's the foremost neuroscientist working on this, or who has worked on it, is neuroception. So really simply put, we often think of the sort of first place that we go to make sense of the world. And what I mean by make sense of is, what data points are you pulling in? What beliefs might you be relying on in order to decide how you feel about a situation, and therefore how you might want to proceed in decision making. Neuroception is this concept in Polyvagal that says the sort of first place we make sense of the world is actually through our physiology, or what you can think of as somatic awareness. Soma comes from the Greek word, somatic comes from the Greek word soma, which means body. So our nervous system is sort of our first responder, and it actually elicits a set of responses in our body depending on a number of factors of incoming stimuli. So we actually detect and respond physiologically before we're cognitively aware that we're doing that. And I think that's super interesting, because if that's the first place, then you could argue in some ways, one way to make sense of that is a really effective place to work with your feelings, your emotions, and your capacities is through your body. It's to not leave it out.
Nita, I'm curious.
Please, yeah.
You kind of jumped over something, and I would love just a little context of what sparked your curiosity into this. So there are many hats that you've worn, and I think we're listening to you being like, this, you obviously clearly know what you're talking about, right? And I'm just curious, just a little bit, just to give a context for why this became interesting to you. And because you've been leaning into this work now. There's a lot of work that you've done, but this feels like the stuff that feels most relevant to the way that you're supporting clients, the way that you're supporting people in the moment. Yeah.
It's hard to provide a pithy answer because nothing feels linear. And
it doesn't have to be linear. We'll surrender linearity.
Yeah, who needs linearity?
Who needs linear?
It's
so pre-COVID-19.
Thank you for the emergence and the organic. So a couple of things. One is, I think I've always just been interested in the way that people relate, connect, and separate from themselves and each other. I worked in the education system, so I had an opportunity to experience that with students as well as with administrators and colleagues. I've seen what that looks like at scale in working with large organizational systems, and really kind of looking, I do a lot of work that applies this theory to the organizational context. When there are a whole bunch of collectives, or when there's a big giant collective trying to navigate the complexities of and the vicissitudes, the ups and downs of being in these dynamic states consistently, how do we do that? How do we equip ourselves for that? And then at a personal level, I was a caregiver to 2 dying parents. So it's a big part of my journey over the course, and was really involved in that many years. And I think learning to navigate that experience and kind of show up in a way where I was really present and wasn't just an asshole and wasn't just like spewing my grief and my own traumatic experience onto other people, but really thinking about like, who do I want to be in this moment as I navigate this experience and the people I'm navigating it with and around and through. Really deepen my interest in this. And there's also a really big connection between this work and meditation, mindfulness, and physical movement practices, which I've always been really enamored of, from martial arts to yoga and more. So.
Awesome. Beautiful. Okay, now the graph. This is what do you call this? You call this
this is a chart that my friend says needs a hug. It's a little heady and it has a bunch of stuff going on.
Okay, so everyone, we're gonna virtually hug. We're gonna virtually hug the slide.
Maybe you can sparklate it.
Elevate it, sparklate it.
That might help transport.
Yeah, we'll help translate. You know, we're gonna all look with new eyes, with virtual hugs and eyeballs. We're gonna look at this chart.
So we're actually working on an adaptation of this, and I really appreciate the people who put this together, including one of Stephen Porges's colleagues, Peter Levine, who I've been studying with recently. And there are a few things I want to say. So these are, sorry about that. These are the three Bagel states I was describing. It's called Polyvagal Theory. Poly means many, vagal means vagus nerve. It's a major nerve in our autonomic nervous system, autonomic being unconscious, there's automatic reactions. And some of this may be familiar to all of you. A couple of things I want to point out. So one is, as Eduardo said earlier, we likely, we have an experience of all of these states probably multiple times over the course of a day. You're not unhealthy if you freeze, and you're not unhealthy if you fight or flight. You're human.
Can we just say that again, please? Can you do that? I just feel like it just needs to be reiterated.
Totally.
Okay, I'm going to ground myself. I'm going to situate myself physically for that. Okay, please throw it on me. Throw it on me. Yes, please.
You're not unhealthy if you freeze. You're not unhealthy if you want to fight or have anger or rage, or if you're joyful. That doesn't mean you're happy. You're healthy either, right? Like these are dynamic states. It means you're human, and we all are, and we all experience all of these states. So number one, when we look at these, I think there's a common orientation and tendency, which I share, which is like, ooh, I want to be in the right one. I want to be in socially engaged all the time. But that's not the truth of actually what is. Like the truth of what is that all of these states exist. And sometimes they sort of overlap, or you can feel them concurrently. The second is you can move through them, right? So these crazy, sorry about that. All of the sine wave and the bell curve, right? They demonstrate the pathways through which we tend to move through these experiences and states. So one thing I want to point out about that, just to make this personally useful, is when we're moving, we often move from a state of fight or flight where we actually either want to engage with something or engage or move away from it, avoid it, into a state of freeze or overwhelm. And how high that goes depends on the person and a whole set of your own individual qualities. But we tend to move through that. And actually, in the process of deactivating or exiting a freeze or overwhelm state, we will find ourselves back in fight or flight. So it's really interesting and nuanced thing to explore in yourself, that sometimes being in this state is actually indicative that you're moving to social engagement, right? It's not that you're on the incline, but it's that you're on the decline. You're coming to a state of greater regulation. Another thing to point out is this little sine wave, which reminds me of a conversation I had with Eduardo early on when we met, which was this idea, I think we were talking about public speaking and the fear it evokes in many people. And the idea, I know my heart beats really quickly when I'm public speaking, and actually, right? Well, welcome to being a human. So, so this idea that the sine wave, right, demonstrates that actually social engagement, being curious, open, mindful, in the moment and present, is a dynamic state. And it's a dynamic movement between being relaxed, which is the green, and alert. It's not flat, right? A flat line on an EKG indicates death. Similarly, again, I want to just kind of underscore that we move through these states and we move within them.
There's a question in the chat. Mercedes says sympathy versus empathy. Why sympathy, which we tend to associate with sorrow, and not empathy?
Why sympathy? Sympathy meaning sympathetic?
Yeah. So she says, why sympathy, which we tend to associate? So there's a sympathetic nervous system as opposed to, I guess, the empathic nervous system, I guess is what she's saying.
So the sympathetic, in this case, the term actually has to do with the way that the pathways in the body work. There's a sympathetic system and a parasympathetic. It's which systems get activated. So the sympathy is relative. It's sympathy for and toward the other pathway. And that's distinct, I think, from the concept or the experience of empathy.
Yeah,
she got that helps.
She's like, yeah. So we got a yes from that. Okay, cool. Great question, Mercedes. Thank you for putting that in. Yeah. Mercedes, by the way, is one of my mother's best friends and one of the oldest like family friends that we have. So anyway, she's been joining us on some of our Fearless chats. Wanted to shout her out.
Thank you, Mercedes. That's great. Awesome.
I met him when he was still in diapers.
When were you last in diapers?
Yesterday.
This is a good question. Another point just to make is growing our capacity for all states, right? So this goes back to not othering our own experience. The downside of othering your experience, which is to say trying to leave a state or push yourself or force yourself out of a state, is that you don't actually gain, number one, what I'll call kind of the innate body wisdom that state wants you to gain from seeing it all the way through. One of the ways we commonly think about this is feel your feelings all the way through. You can't effectively move through a state unless you allow yourself to do so holistically. And if you don't, there's an accumulation or there's a downstream effect somewhere in your system, right? So that's a reason for just being able to build your capacity to stay with it and move through it, as opposed to avoid it or numb it or do other things that we do. And we all have ways we numb. The way I like to think of this is it's this ongoing growing capacity for all states. Again, it's okay if we numb it, and then grow your capacity for being comfortable with the fact that you're numbing it, right? Like, don't add weight to that, because that'll actually, right, that'll make it more challenging. So it's this ever growing capacity, kind of like the infinity of the cosmos. Yeah. And the last thing about this is all states serve a purpose. So another way I like to think about this is these are very intelligent responses from your body. They're pro-survival and they're pro-thriving. They help us adapt, and they help us evolve. And a really simple way I like to think about that is, can you, when you become more aware of these states in your body, sit with them? And for example, even if it's painful to be in fight or flight, is there a way to perhaps add to the story of pain, acknowledge that it's painful, and add a story that's somewhat more neutral, that says the pain is providing me with information, and then just listen to that information. Like, what does it want to tell you? There's a lot of wisdom in why we find ourselves in fight or flight, right? And that wisdom, when we listen to it and integrate it, can redirect us, set us on a different course, or I don't know, otherwise liberate us. This is all part of liberation for me.
Yeah, Nita, Jody Moulder just said something. She said, it seems like judgment of the state also shuts it down.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful way to put it. Thank you. Yes, agreed. Yeah.
And then Lori wrote like emotional intelligence to your last statement. Yeah.
Totally.
I think what I just got about the intelligence, it's not like it's done, but it's a constant discovery and knowing that the intelligence is not static, right? But it is alive. The knowing deepens and continues to expand and resonate.
Yeah. It's emergent is a way I think about it as well.
Beautiful. Okay, and now Nita, I'm excited for what's next.
Yeah, I think we should move in. Great, we are going to move into some practices. So here's my quick plugs. And Eduardo, how are we on time? We're going to have time to
we have about 15 minutes. We have about 15 minutes.
15. Okay, awesome. So these, how do you apply this, right? How do you make it relevant in your life and potentially with teams at work and with others in your life who you're in relationship with? So the thing, part of why we like to leave people with practices is so that you have a way to practically apply this. And because if you build what we describe as a practice container, it can proactively support you in the moments you need it, right? So if you find yourself really uncomfortable in any one of those states, but you have practices that you've proactively been building the capacity for, it's like building a muscle, you can draw on them when you actually need it. In addition, if you proactively engage in practices that, for example, help you down-regulate to a state of social engagement, it'll help you reduce the frequency and intensity of the moments that you experience, of the challenge you experience. How frequently should you do practices? The science of habit formation talks a lot about, there are different schools of thought on this, but 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 30 days, 40 days.
I was like, that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a long practice.
I know, that's a long practice.
That's a long practice. I don't know if I can convince with that.
But the science of habit formation really emphasizes consistency. And they say that it takes about 30 days or maybe up to 6 weeks to build a new habit. So practices are about also interrupting or disrupting your existing patterns so you can play and experiment with new ones. Where would you do these practices? So environmental conditions that support you. And so if we go back to the point about the importance of the body and the cues that the body is seeking or from the environment, and some of those cues are, what's in your visual field? What are the sounds or the voices that you hear? If you're engaged with people, what are their facial expressions? What is the state of their nervous system? How are they breathing? How are they moving? How are they communicating? Those are factors in your environmental conditions you may want to consider as you think about a space that you might want to practice this in. So generally being in a space where you feel a high level of safety, whatever that means for you, really promotes your ability to deepen and integrate the practices in a way that really supports your well-being.
Before we move into the practice, Pat, Alpha, you have a hand raised. Is that like, you have a hand raised, or is that your phone?
No, I do have a hand raised.
Okay, great. Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Pat.
Hi, Pat.
So, in last night, with all the things that were going, I live in my home with my husband. We adore each other. But yet last night, it was like, oh my God, I need space. We're together all day long. Somehow the level of anxiety, which I'm pretty good with, was just so high that it just shows up like I'm making them wrong, and I can't be with anything. And so I wanted to communicate that this is my anxiety. It has nothing to do with him, even though it's landing like I'm making him wrong, but it's just this experience of being cooped up for this. And I'm an exercise instructor, so I teach spin.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach a lot of spin. So I have so much energy. And so I haven't had the ability to really move my body that way. And so when I'm there, I just didn't know how to bring myself to a place where I could just center myself. I communicated to him, I apologize for the energy, but it's just that had nothing to do with him, but it's just in me. So how do you, I don't know that I could sit down and just meditate with all that energy.
Yeah.
I wanted to
Awesome.
just take a pillow and beat the pillow up, just how do because when you're there, it's so, I feel like I can control it. I mean, I'm not going to hurt anybody, but this is so unusual.
Yeah.
The state that we're in.
That's all. Please remind me your name again. I know
Pat Calfa.
Pat.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Pat. I think that's an awesome example, and I'm sure it resonates with many people.
Can anyone relate to Pat Calfa's statement of being so often living with someone and there's a lot of yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I there are two things I want to respond to in particular. So I want to just point out the innate body wisdom that you shared, right? Like you actually shared both the challenge or the discomfort, which was the experience of anxiety that you named, and then you shared what your body wanted to do with it, right? Which was like punch the pillow or like move. So anxiety falls into the fight or flight state, and specifically it falls into flight. And anxiety is this energy that seeks expression, right? So it's like, what wants to happen? That's this question of what wants to happen when you tune into that and you sense that. It's all there. Like, I don't have to tell you what to do, right? Although we can come up and that, and you were self-regulated there. I want to point out too, that even when we're in the moments of challenge, we're self-regulated at the same time. So you were self-regulated in the sense that you were able to communicate, right, as well as you could, and you were aware. Part of self-regulation is the ability to be aware to begin with of the state that you're in and what you don't want to do when you're in that state. So you didn't want to hurt him, right, or hurt anybody else.
You wanted to hurt the pillow.
You wanted to hurt the pillow. Your body wanted to experience and express the movement all the way through. And so in that case, and it's absolutely true that meditation is not it's absolutely true for you that in that moment, meditation's not going to calm your anxiety down. By contrast, movement where you could get up, and you also described that you haven't been able to move, right, with the same frequency that you're used to, or the nature of movement that you're used to. So that your body knows, and part of it is finding constructive ways that are safe and healthy to be able to express the movement that you need. So yeah, thank you so much.
This is perfect as an opportunity for all of us to use this and their version of Pat's story to anchor into the practice. So she has a practice, Pat, that we're going to go through now that I think will be helpful to help walk through this.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. You're such a perfect segue. Thank you.
And thank you, Pat, for giving voice to that experience in a way that's really authentic and true, because I think you're giving voice to, like, what do I do with the feelings that I'm feeling right now? The anger, the rage, the anxiety. And sometimes, Lori talked about she threw a plate on the ground, and that felt really good. Do you know what I mean? It was safe, but that's what the energy wanted to do. And not like resisting or blocking that expression, but figuring out and understanding how can I use that energy or shift that energy or be with that energy.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So this practice comes from a therapist named Manuela Mishka Reeds, who's in practice on the West Coast. And I'm a big fan of hers. She uses this in trauma healing and in other psychotherapeutic contexts. And it's a psychosomatic practice. So I'm just going to walk you all through it. And this slide is deliberately simple because the practice is actually pretty simple. But I hope that what you discover is that it really helps you get in touch with some things that may be unseen or unconscious to you. So if you want to just take a moment to kind of maybe retune into some of the energy that Deborah had set up in her grounding exercise with us, and just begin by feeling the weight and the energy of your body in your feet. So if it's not there now, you can imagine that it's there, or you can direct it there. And then I'd love for you to just tune into your experience in this present moment. And specifically, just begin to bring awareness to sensations that you feel in your body right now. Sometimes it helps to take a couple of breaths to become aware of the sensations and just connect with them. Then I'm going to invite you to pick a sensation, and you can choose. You are free to choose whether it's a sensation that you would describe as comfortable or as uncomfortable. So you decide and just stay with that sensation. Just turn toward it. And we won't stay very long. And then I invite you to explore the sensation. And if you can bring a spirit of curiosity to it, that would be awesome. But bring whatever energy you have to it to explore. What is the texture of the sensation? And there are no right answers. It's just whatever comes up for you. If the sensation had a color, what color would it be? And if the sensation could make a sound, what would it sound like? If you were to pick a metaphor for the sensation, what would it be? And then finally, if the sensation could move, what movement would it make? We'll just stay with it for a little bit longer. And now we're going to notice what wants to happen. what wants to happen. And now I just invite you to reflect for a moment. What did you learn? What's new or different in how you make sense or meaning of that sensation? Feel free to stay with it for a moment, and whenever you're ready, you can join us. Just take a couple of breaths. You can exhale with your chin to your chest and gently open your eyes if they've been closed and come back.
I want to share, Nita, and I would love for some people to also share as well if they feel compelled or inspired. What I leaned into was my anxiety, which I was feeling in my chest.
Beautiful.
And I started getting a little alliterative with it. So it was
surprise.
It was prickly. It was purple. It was a panther, and it needed to prance. Is what happened.
Wow.
So, and what I got for the first time, and I've been noticing that when I have these feelings of anxiety, which are prevalent, like I'm definitely living with this anxiety in this moment, and I'm naming it in all the ways that I am in communication about it, because I don't want to keep that in. I want to be in communication.
Wonderful.
Is that I need to go out for a walk. So like actually getting at it, like, so now on my schedule, like I have like after this around 6:30, I'll go for a walk that could be anywhere between 1 to 2 miles. There's a little walk along the beach. So I can't get on the beach, but there's a walk along it. But just like getting out and getting the fresh air and being in movement really helps to channel that energy. And that just because I'm feeling it doesn't mean that I am it. Right? Just because I'm feeling anxiety doesn't mean that my identity is anxiety. It's just something that I'm feeling in this moment, and it's something to move. Kathy raised her hand. Kathy, would you like to share?
Yes, I would. So I've been having these really weird yawning and breathing, like I can't get a full breath, and I have been just trying to figure out what is going on, and I haven't called my doctor yet. I really am attributing it to stress, and there you go. And and it's just staying with me. I'm doing everything I can think of, from meditating to tapping to all kinds of things. But yeah, so when you walked us through that, the color was also for me like a dark purple red, like blood. And it was definitely kind of in the back of my head. And when you said if it could move, I almost felt it like moving up my head. And I wanted it to sort of move out. But one of the things that was very helpful was not yawning and not breathing too deeply, and just kind of checking it out. And it's a very bizarre feeling. It's like a really tight feeling in the back of my throat. And the metaphor was like a paddle lock on the back of my throat. That's it. I don't know what, I mean, it's really uncomfortable. I'm really struggling and trying to fix it.
Well, thank you for bringing that to I just want to acknowledge you for the courage of speaking up and sharing that and giving voice to that in the space, and just honor you for where you are in the journey of that.
Yeah, that what you just both shared just kind of reminds me, like, I think of this space as a sacred space. And I just want to, and I mean that in a kind of secular sense, but the sharing of your personal experience is sacred and beautiful. So thank you. I receive it as a gift. I should say I'm not licensed as a therapist to like diagnose and treat, but we use this, but I am studied and practiced in it and a student of it. And what I will say is, again, I think I'll just underscore that there's so much innate wisdom in the experience you described, right? It's amazing how with a few cues and prompts, you were able to follow the path of the desired movement.
Yeah, I just keep trying to fix it, you know, like what can I do to solve this problem? This is a problem solve, you know, figure this out.
Perfect.
And haven't really sat with it and watched. That was very new and interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so that was going to be my next point. And you're like this bright, perfect light to illuminate this point about fixing, right? That's part of why we're really intentional about using the language of building comfort. And there may be another metaphor that works better for you than building comfort, but it's what we've come up with to be broad in the way that we relate to these experiences, right? A lot of it is about building a deeper intimacy and connection to the experience as opposed to trying to solve it or fix it. Because a lot of fixing energy, and if you notice, even when you say the word fix, like what does it evoke in your body, right? There's a constriction, there's a closure and a clamping down. And part of what we want to bring to our experience is an opening and an invitational quality to how we engage with ourselves. Because it is that, you know, it's the sort of closing down that's going to, it creates, if you imagine closing down as sort of like shutting your palm, there's an obscurity there. Like it's hard for me to be connected to or in relationship with the thing inside of my palm until I open it, right? And soften. So that being with it. And the other thing I'll say is this is also about patience, which is it means different things to different people, but I think it takes time to build the capacity to really attune yourself and build your own awareness of your body. We are and I'm making a generalization, but we are a disembodied culture on the whole, right? Like we have this split between mind or brain and physical body, and we try to fix body related issues with our minds, which is part of it. It's just not all of it, and it's not the whole. And there are other ways to kind of penetrate and engage with our own experiences. I brought up this chart, by the way, which is comes from a Finnish study by a woman named Lori, and I'm going to mess up her last name, but I can share this as a resource. That is really, it was there have been a few iterations of this study, but this one was people self-reporting where they felt energy in their bodies when they experienced these various emotions. And there was a high level of convergence apparently across cultures. And they also did this across generations. So it's interesting. I think today we've heard a couple of times a reference to anxiety. And I think Eduardo, you specifically pointed out like the experience in your chest. There are also the parts of the head that Kathy, I think you were referring to. There are cranial nerves and other nerves that are associated with the diaphragm and lungs and other part, you know, there's one of the really interesting things about polyvagal theory is there's this bi-directional communication between the brain, what we conventionally think of as the brain. We also have a brain in our gut, but and the visceral organs, the internal organs. And so there's communication between your diaphragm and your brain. And the diaphragm will tell the brain information, and the brain will tell the diaphragm information. It goes both ways. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. You might just take a look at this and see if it resonates or reflects any of your own experiences.
So Nita, we are reaching time.
Perfect.
Pat, I'm going to hold off on you to see if Nita, if what she's going to share will answer your question, because she has a really generous offer, which she's going to mention in a second. So just be ready to bounce on that, Pat. And then we can stay on after. I just want to honor the container of the time that we have. If there are any questions to ask Nita, that we can do that. So as we wrap this conversation up, Nita, where would you like us to anchor or find ourselves on planet Earth, shaky in space, navigating with our systems and our newfound intelligence?
I think of building comfort with comfort and discomfort as a form of self-love and love that supports others. I think self-love is generative for the people around you. And if you think about, and self-care is actually collective care, right? It's not just my nervous system, but mine's impacting yours and vice versa. So to take care of yourself is to do a service to us all. So I just invite you to be in the inquiry of that. I'm so happy. This is a liberatory practice for me. I'm so happy that we're engaging in liberation together as community. And thank you for your generosity in your sharing, your listening, and your presence.
Can we get off of the screen thing? So we'll come back to our space.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
sharing the screen. Oh, here we are all together back in Zoom land.
And the offer.
Yes, Nita. Nita has a get ready, ladies and gentlemen, because she's coming in hot. She's coming in hot.
So I am happy to do 30-minute sessions. I'm going to limit it at the moment to like maybe the first 12 people. I know this is a group of 30 and I'd love to serve you all. But in the interest of self-care as well, but I would, I would love to invite you for 30-minute sessions to kind of explore and apply Polyvagal to your own circumstances. And Deborah just shared my email, which is nita@befree.live in the chat box.
Great. So again, for the first 12 people who reach out to you, they will have a
free 30-minute session.
30-minute session with her to discuss this. Pat, is that helpful? Does that answer your question?
I'm okay with it.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll reach
stay
out
online.
to her.
Okay, great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll say.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you all so much for joining us for our Fearless Chat number 12 with Nita Baum, Elevated Sparkle-ish on this conversation. Thank you so much for bringing your gift and your generosity and your wisdom. This was a fascinating conversation. Next Thursday, we will have our very own Deborah Driscoll leading a conversation. Deborah, do you just want to give a quick little shout out about what you're going to be sharing?
Sure. So when I'm not fearless, well, I'm fearless all the time, but when I'm not working on the fearless team, I am a grief guide. So what I do is I help people to navigate the sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes comfortable experience of grief. And so on Thursday, I'm going to be talking about grief and what we do when grief arrives at the party. So we're all hanging about in our shelter in place. If grief knocks on the door, should I open the door? Should I let grief in? On Tuesday, we'll be talking about that. And similar to Nita, I'll be giving some exercises you can do to actually be in a relationship with your grief.
Awesome. And we'll have more on that. So check out your emails around that. There'll also be a replay of this that I'll share with you as well. And next Tuesday at 5 p.m., we're pausing our Fearless Chat series to celebrate the 4th birthday of our Fearless Force program, which is our signature program. which Deborah was a participant in, Sarita Winthrop was a participant in, Nita Baum is a participant in. It's our global commitment to women and women's stories. It's our signature program. We work with cohorts of women on crafting thought leadership signature speeches. We've done 19 programs all over the world, all over the United States, Israel, and also in Australia. And it's going to be an epic party celebrating women, women's stories, and the change that they're making in the world. So that is an invitation. There is a small donation that we are asking for that to support 2 nonprofits that are women in our community lead. One is called Lend a Hand Uganda, and the other one is called Girls on Fire Leaders. Both of them are supporting COVID relief efforts, one in Kibera, which is the biggest slum in Nairobi, in getting food. They're delivering food to over 2,000 people. And in Uganda, the food is going specifically to the children because they normally go to school to eat, and they're not at school right now because they're sheltering at home. So your participation and your invitation to that is also a support to those very specific ways that we can show up also in service of the people around us. So check out your email for that.
Can you give us the Nita's email again?
Yeah,
please?
it's nita@befree.live.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And in the final invitation on Friday at 5 p.m., I host a big gay virtual sing-along as an opportunity to get into your bodies and sing and dance and vibrate and sing all the songs that you guiltily know all the lyrics to. So that will also be in the email. We do flash dance, we do show tunes, we do Journey, we do Don't Stop Believin'. It's a hoot and a holler, and an opportunity to vibrate, high vibrate, at the end of the week in community. So thank you so much for being here with us. We always finish by saying, fear less, speak free, and love more. And if you're able to stay on and would like to share, a takeaway and be in communication with us, we're going to keep this conversation open a little bit. This is the end of our official program, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Happy Thursday to those who can make it.
Yes. So Pat, did you want to share something?
Yeah, so it was very interesting because when she shared that with the level that I get at is the flight level, I do that all the time. When I'm set up with stress and I can't deal with it, I'm out of there. And so I have been training myself to not leave, but be with whatever the anxiety shows up. Because usually I just leave. And so that was very interesting that she said that,
She's still here, by the way, Pat.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so Anita is like, oh my God, that's me. I leave. And so what I've been saying is, Pat, don't leave when you're there, because it just leaves people in a funky place, but it's almost like I feel I can't deal with staying anymore. So I'm always leaving. And so that's very interesting observation.
Someone wrote here something that was really great. They said something like, what was each emotion has a message for you.
Yeah.
You just suck at translation.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
That's a hashtag. That's a hashtag.
That's great. That's great.
Which is really good, which I'm like, oh, that's totally right. Yes. Yeah.
This was awesome. So thank you both. This was
welcome.
awesome.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for being here. Delise or Luana, did you want to share anything that you got from being on this call?
So I'm heading off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat.
Love you, Eduardo.
Love you, Pat. Great seeing you on here. My best to John.
Hi, I'm Luana.
Hi, Luana. Where are you joining us from?
I'm calling you from just north of San Francisco.
San Francisco, open your golden gate. Don't let the body wait outside your door. Yeah. That's my show tune. That's my show tune, Luana. It's live. It's live.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much. I learned a great deal from this. So that's all I want to say. And I will be here definitely on the next one for grief. I'm going to tune it right in. But this gave me, I'm sorry, first I want to apologize for the picture, but
Great. It's a beautiful picture.
I know.
Luana, please.
I was in the middle of the Karnak temple in Egypt, and I feel like that.
It looks Egypt. Like I was in Egypt in 2015. There was something about it's like the sandstone in the background. Like, oh,
that's a happy place there. So, but it was very informative in terms of sitting inside of something and not fixing it. I'm a firstborn Aries, like to fix things very much, and so to be able to sit in something and be there and notice it and get the lesson out of it and not try to move to fix it is big for me. That's big. So I have emailed you, Nita, so hopefully I'm part of the
Great. Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge the witchiness of the space when you said I'm an Aries, and then both Nita, Deborah, and was like, totally get it.
Yeah.
We're down. Oh my God, we got it. We processed that. We got it. Totally. So we hope to see you again, Luana. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luana.
Nicholas, did you have something you wanted to share? Are you still on? How about you, Delise?
Nicholas says just
Nicholas is
listening.
just listening. It's great to have you on, Nicholas.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Allie, joining us again?
I will email you.
Great.
It's too much. Thanks.
Well, I'm so grateful that you're able
Thank you.
to reach out and to have that as a point of service. So thank you so much for joining us again, Allie. Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna close down. Nita, if you can stay on for a second, we're just gonna
Sure.
stop.